Please follow me home. My mom is about to give birth to my little brother," cried the alien girl. The late afternoon cycle on Orvin Halo carried a steady brightness that washed the concourse in pale, even light. White ceiling panels cast a calm glow over the clean alloy floors, and the air smelled faintly of filtered mist and the bitter edge of Furland seed coffee from the vendor stalls tucked between loading gates. People moved with practiced rhythm, heads bent towards schedules projected across their wrists, shoulders angled to avoid collision. Conversations kept low so the space felt orderly. Hector moved with none of their urgency. He stood near a structural column, scanning a stress map projection on his wristband. Thin arcs of color tracked pressure distribution along support joints beneath this floor. He studied each reading with slow focus. He'd spent the last 12 years as a structural safety inspector on the Halo, and the last 6 months assigned to the upper decks after 2 minor accidents had shaken public confidence. His job here was simple but tense. Evaluate the concourse for hidden weaknesses, ensure the weight distribution didn't strain the ring, and report any small fault before it became a dangerous one. He wasn't military, but the years of emergency drills and fast response training left their mark. He carried himself with quiet discipline, a trimmed jawline, steady eyes, and a body that had learned how to move calmly even during alarms. He checked one more line of numbers. Everything looked stable, but his instincts kept him alert. Growing up on a colony that collapsed from structural failure had burned certain sounds into his body: creaks, shifts, vibrations. He listened for them even when he wasn't on duty. He took a slow breath, rolled the tension out of his shoulders, and lowered the projection. Someone slammed into his side. He turned fast. A girl, barely 7 years old, stumbled back from him. Her sea-green skin had a faint gray tint, the kind that came from exhaustion, not illness. Her long yellow hair was tangled and stuck to her forehead with sweat. Her dress was a thin peach-colored scrap, torn at one side, the strap slipping down her shoulder. Her knees were scraped, and her bare feet looked raw from running on cold alloy floors. She grabbed his sleeve with both hands, gripping hard. Her chest rose in short, sharp breaths. Fear pushed her voice up as she tried to speak. "Please follow me home. My mom, she's having my brother right now. She's alone. Nobody helps. They just look at us and walk away. Please come. You look like you can help." Hector felt his stomach tighten. The emotion was simple: concern. His body reacted instantly. His pulse jumped, and he lowered himself to her height so they could talk eye to eye. Her fingers trembled around his sleeve. He kept his voice calm. "What's your name?" "Miri." She swallowed hard. "My mom is Narine. She said to stay with her, but she was scared and I ran to get someone." Hearing that made something heavy settle behind his ribs. She ran through this whole concourse alone while her mother labored in some forgotten corner of the Halo. The thought irritated him. Not at her, but at every adult who had stepped aside instead of stepping in. "Where is she?" he asked. "Down below. Not far." Her eyes flicked to the crowd around them, as if expecting someone to push her away again. "Will you come now?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Take me to her." Her relief was immediate and visible. Her shoulders dropped, her breath steadied for a moment, and her eyes filled with new tears. Not fear this time, but release. She turned and ran. Hector followed, weaving through the moving bodies with long, controlled strides. The girl darted between legs, slipping through gaps he had to widen with sharp, apologetic steps, but she never moved out of his sight. Her hair whipped behind her as she pushed through a service door without slowing. He entered the stairwell after her, the temperature dropping sharply as the polished concourse gave way to exposed steel grates. The stairwell smelled of cold metal and stale coolant. The lights hummed overhead. Miri's feet slapped the grates. She moved fast despite her size, driven by panic, not endurance. "Keep going," Hector said, voice firm but steady. "I'm right behind you." She looked over her shoulder once to check, and he saw something fragile in her face, hope balanced on fear. They descended 2 levels. He noticed the walls here carried thin cracks near bold junctions. Nothing dangerous yet, but years of poor maintenance had left their marks. He made mental notes without slowing down. At the bottom of the stairs, she led him across a narrow maintenance bridge. The graded walkway vibrated under their weight. Through the gaps, he saw machinery cycling in slow piston movements, pushing warm air upward. Her small feet made light metal clinks, while his heavy boots sent deep reverberations through the structure. "Is it always like this down here?" he asked. "When the weather shifts below," she said without looking back. "The supports shake. Mom doesn't like it." He didn't either, but he kept that thought to himself. They reached a shadowed corridor. Lights flickered overhead, some failing to brighten fully. The air grew warmer, thicker with moisture from old pipes. Miri pressed her hands against a bent metal panel jammed open with a rusted tool. She squeezed through the gap. Hector followed, ducking his head. Inside was barely enough room for 3 people. The insulation blankets on the floor were worn thin. A cracked container of Orvan water sat beside a small stack of baby cloth someone had tried very hard to fold neatly. The space carried a faint scent of metal, heat, and human sweat. Narine lay on her side, near the far wall. The moment he saw her, Hector understood why Miri had panicked. Her skin, the same sea glass green as her daughter's, was flushed deeper along her collarbones. Her copper hair clung to her face in damp strands. Her work wrap, teal, sleeveless, tied at one shoulder, had twisted up around her thighs from the strain of contractions. She tried to pull the fabric down when she noticed him, but the pain stopped her halfway. She met his eyes with a mixture of embarrassment, fear, and stubbornness. "We don't need trouble," she said, voice strained. "Just take Miri upstairs. She'll wait." Another contraction hit. Her back arched. She gripped the blanket beneath her, breathing through clenched teeth. Hector moved fast, dropping beside her and putting his jacket under her head. "You're too far along to move," he said. "We're staying here." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know us." "You asked for help," he said simply. "I'm helping." Her breath shook. Her fingers clutched the fabric at her hip. Miri crouched beside her mother. "I brought him." He didn't walk away. For a moment, Narine let her hand rest on her daughter's cheek. Her fingers shook. Hector assessed the space quickly. No airflow. A faint vibration in the floor. The sound of machinery straining somewhere below. It made the back of his neck tighten. He checked Narine's pulse, counting silently. She was scared but stable. The baby was coming soon. "Miri," he said softly, "I need hot water and clean cloth. Where can you get some?" "There's a wash line near the end of the corridor." "Good. Go. Tell anyone who stops you that the safety inspector authorized it." She nodded and ran. As soon as she left, the corridor outside trembled with a low mechanical groan. Hector recognized it instantly, a stabilizer under strain. Probably from turbulence in the gas giant below. Not immediate danger, but it meant this area would be stressed for the next few minutes. Narine heard the creak and tensed. Her breathing grew shallow. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Fear made her voice tight. "It's manageable," he said. "Focus on your breathing. In through your nose, slow. I've got you." He kept one hand on her shoulder to keep her steady. Her muscles were rigid with pain and tension. "I didn't want her to run alone," she said suddenly, the words breaking out between breaths. "She shouldn't have had to." "She won't anymore," Hector said. A sharp crack echoed in the corridor. Small flakes of composite drifted down from the ceiling through the open panel. Hector's pulse kicked hard. Miri returned with a water bowl, sloshing dangerously. Her hands shook as she nudged the panel wider. "She's not dying, right?" Miri whispered, voice small and breaking. Hector put his hand on the top of her head, guiding her closer gently. "She's not dying," he said. "She's doing something very hard, and we're helping her." Miri pressed her forehead briefly against his arm, grounding herself, then stepped beside her mother. Another contraction hit. Narine's breath caught and her hand shot out, gripping Hector's sleeve. Her nails dug into his arm through the fabric. He didn't flinch. Emotion hit him fast, protectiveness. It sharpened his focus. He moved closer, supporting her back, checking the angle of her hips, listening to the rhythm of her breath. "Listen to me," he said. "We need to move you. The ceiling isn't safe." "I can't," she gasped. "Not like this." "You can," he said, voice low but firm. You hold on to me. I'll carry you. Her eyes widened, fear mixing with trust she didn't want to show. But another crack from the corridor pushed her decision. She nodded once. He slid one arm under her legs and one behind her back. She grabbed his neck, fingers locking in his shirt. When he lifted her, her wrap shifted, exposing more of her thigh, but she didn't try to adjust it. Pain pushed modesty aside. Hector steadied her weight easily. Her body curled into him, breath hot against his collarbone. "Miri, stay right behind me," he said. "I'm here," she answered, voice thin but determined. They moved into the corridor. Dust fell in a slow drift from a sagging panel. Hector kept his body between the falling debris and the two of them as he moved toward a maintenance alcove lit by a single emergency strip. He knelt and lowered Narration onto a coil of insulated conduit, supporting her back until she was stable. Miri knelt on her other side, clutching her mother's hand. Narain's face twisted as the next contraction tore through her. "Push," Hector said softly. "You're close." "I'm right here." Minutes felt like hours. Warm air pressed down on them. Machinery groaned below. Sweat beaded at Hector's temple as he worked, but he didn't break his focus. A sharp, high cry cut through the alcove. Miri gasped, hands flying her mouth. Narain's body sagged with relief as Hector lifted the tiny newborn boy, quickly wrapping him in his own undershirt before placing him gently in her arms. Her wrap slipped again. Hector adjusted the fabric for her quietly, eyes steady, no discomfort in his face. When she looked up at him, something raw flickered across her expression, gratitude mixed with disbelief. The stabilizer crew arrived minutes later, flashing lights scanning the corridor. Hector stepped out of the alcove first, raising his ID band. "Level 3 emergency relocation," he said. "Mother and children are under my temporary care." There was weight in the way he said it. Decision. Commitment. A line drawn. Behind him, Narration held her newborn tightly, and Miri hovered protectively near her mother's hip, watching Hector with a trust she hadn't given anyone else today. Hector didn't fully understand why this family felt different to him, why the moment Miri grabbed his sleeve something inside him locked in a place. But he knew one thing clearly as he stood there, shielding them from the noise of the crew. He wasn't stopping at this rescue. He was staying. The stabilizer crew moved around them with the usual clipped efficiency, scanning ceiling joints, checking vibration logs, marking weak sections for overnight repair, but Hector barely registered their noise. His attention stayed on Narration as she shifted the newborn higher against her chest, adjusting the fabric of her wrap so it covered her shoulder again. Her breathing was still uneven, but the panic that had seized her earlier had softened into exhaustion. Miri stayed glued to her side, one hand resting protectively on the baby's tiny leg wrapped in Hector's undershirt. The child stared at the sleeping infant with a seriousness far beyond her age. Hector stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need to move you somewhere safe before this section gets sealed off." Narration blinked slowly, still catching her breath. "They'll let us through?" "They will," Hector said. "You're under emergency relocation. That gives us clearance for now." She nodded faintly, though uncertainty tightened the muscles in her jaw. Her world had been measured in small threats for too long, and the idea of trusting authority didn't sit easily on her face. He lifted the thin insulation blanket, gently tucking it around her waist. The movement was deliberate, steady, respectful. She watched his hands carefully, as if waiting for something harsher, but when nothing harsh came, her shoulders eased. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Not alone," she admitted quietly. He offered his arm. She took it without argument, fingers gripping his sleeve as she rose. Her knees wobbled. He tightened his hold immediately, letting her lean into his side until her balance steadied. Miri pressed herself close to Narain's hip, ready to catch any sway despite being far too small to manage it. Hector crouched slightly to meet Miri's eyes. "Stay right between us. Don't fall behind." "I won't," she said, nodding fast. Her hair swung forward, hiding half her face for a moment. She pushed it back with a small, shaky breath. They stepped out of the alcove together. The corridor lights flickered again, but the structure felt more stable now that the system had redistributed load to the upper decks. Even so, Hector kept himself positioned slightly ahead of them, body angled to shield them from the debris that still sprinkled down from the ceiling here and there. As they walked, his mind ran through procedures. Emergency relocation required a destination, some official shelter or loan unit he could sign for. The lower decks had shared sleeping pods, but he'd seen them. Filthy, crowded, unsafe. The idea of leaving Narration and the children in one of those places tightened something unpleasant in his chest. He slowed his pace slightly, letting Narration walk beside him rather than behind. Her wrap clung to her body where sweat still dampened the fabric. She gathered its edges together with one hand, holding the newborn to her chest with the other. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice low. "There's a temporary unit 3 levels up," he said. "Inspection teams use it during long shifts. It's clean, quiet. It has proper ventilation. You'll rest there tonight." She hesitated. "You're allowed to move us there?" "Yes. You're part of the incident report now." A crew worker passed them, glancing quickly at Narration and the baby before returning to his scanner tablet. The look wasn't hostile, just puzzled. Like he wasn't sure how a human inspector ended up escorting a Sarithi woman and her children out a near-collapse zone. Hector adjusted his stance protectively, and the worker looked away. They reached the stairwell. The cool air drifted up from the lower vents. Hector glanced down the long descent they had climbed earlier. "You can't take these stairs," he said. "Your legs won't handle it yet." "So how we get up?" Narane's voice carried a mix of worry and fatigue. "There's a maintenance lift behind the next bulkhead." Miri perked up. "The one the cleaning drones use?" "Yes." She looked impressed. "We never get to use that." "Today you do," Hector said. They walked to the bulkhead, and Hector keyed in his override code. The door slid open with a heavy hiss. A small lift stood inside, bare metal walls, a simple handrail, and a control column with manual switches. It smelled faintly of oil and recycled air. Narration paused at the threshold, eyes scanning the cramped interior. Her body trembled faintly, a mix of post-labor weakness and the memory of the deck shuddering beneath her earlier. Hector touched her elbow lightly. "It's stable," he said. "I won't let anything happen while you're in there." For a moment, she held his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, an exhausted trust that surprised her almost as much as it surprised him. She stepped in. He entered right after, standing close enough to support her if she wavered again. Miri slipped in beside him, clutching the railing with both hands, but standing tall, trying to look braver than she felt. Hector hit the switch. The lift rose with a low mechanical hum, steady and smooth. The motion eased some tension from Narane's face, but she kept her hand on Hector's sleeve, anchoring herself. He didn't move away. Halfway up, Miri spoke softly. "Are we going to stay in that place tonight?" "Yes," Hector said. "Together?" Narration shot her daughter a quick look, half embarrassed, half curious about what Hector would say. He answered without hesitation. "It's safer if we stay together until the sector stabilizes." Miri nodded once. Her small fingers curled tighter around the rail. She seemed relieved, though she tried to hide it behind a serious expression. The lift reached level 28. The doors opened into a quiet corridor lit with clean white panels. The air smelled fresher here, sterile but comfortable. Hector led them to a narrow door marked with the simple blue stripe used for crew rest units. He unlocked it with his wristband and stepped aside to let them enter first. The room was small but tidy. A fold-out couch sat against one wall. A compact cooking unit occupied a corner. A small table held sealed packets of ration bread and 2 containers of mineral water. A narrow window looked out on the swirling violet clouds below, not decorative but functional, providing light and a sense of open space. Narane's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in every detail, checking for threats, exits, anything that mattered to someone who'd lived too long in unstable conditions. The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction when she saw nothing dangerous. Hector watched her quietly. Emotion stirred in him. Empathy, sharp and immediate. He wanted her to feel safe here, even temporarily. "You can sit," he said gently. She sank onto the couch with a tired exhale, still holding the baby. Miri climbed up beside her, knees pulled tight to her chest. Hector moved to the small cooking unit, opening one of the ration packets. Inside were slices of dense protein bread, the kind used during long shifts. He warmed it quickly, the surface turning slightly crisp. The smell was simple but comforting. He placed the plate on the table in front of them. "Eat something. You'll need the strength." Miri reached first, eyes wide as she tore off a piece. Narration followed slowly, lifting the bread to her mouth with one hand while holding the infant with the other. She chewed with deliberate slowness, her breathing evening as calories hit her system. Hector sat on the edge of the table, arms resting on his thighs, watching their reactions. His voice lowered. "What happened to your living unit?" he asked. "You weren't supposed to be on that lower deck. It's been flagged unstable for months." Narine's fingers paused over the bread. She looked down at her lap. "They moved us out of our last place after the work contract closed. This was the only space left where no one complained." She kept her voice steady, but bitterness slipped through the edges. "People don't like sharing walls with us, especially with a child." Miri pressed closer to her mother. "They always tell us to go somewhere else," she said, "but there's never anywhere else." Hector's chest tightened again. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, hiding the frustration in his expression. "You won't be going back there," he said quietly. Narine's eyes flicked up. "And where will we go after this?" "I'll figure something out." His tone was firm, an internal decision already forming. Not an impulsive promise, but a responsibility he had accepted the moment Miri grabbed his sleeve. Narration swallowed, looking at him with a mix of disbelief and reluctant hope. "You don't even know us," she said. He held her gaze steadily. "I know enough." Silence settled for a moment. Soft, heavy, real. Then the baby stirred against her chest, a small sound barely louder than a breath. Narration adjusted him gently, sliding her wrap so the fabric covered more of her shoulder. Hector stepped closer, checking the newborn's breathing with a practiced glance. "You're doing well," he said. Her lips parted slightly at the quiet praise, and for the first time since he'd met her, a trace of softness entered her eyes. Miri watched both of them with silent intensity, then leaned her head against Hector's arm without warning. The gesture was small, but full of trust. He rested a hand lightly on her hair, steadying her. That was all the confirmation he needed. They were staying with him tonight, and he wasn't letting them drift through the cracks of the halo again. The room stayed quiet after the baby settled. A low hum from the ventilation system filled the silence, steady and clean compared to the noisy lower decks. Hector watched Narration adjust her position on the couch, pulling one leg up carefully, trying not to strain the muscles that had carried her through a dangerous labor only an hour earlier. She winced slightly as she moved. He caught it immediately. "You shouldn't twist like that yet," he said, standing from the table. "Your core muscles are still in shock." Narration exhaled slowly. "I'll be fine. You don't have to be fine right now." His tone stayed calm, firm, just comfortable. Her eyes flicked away, as if the idea of comfort made her uneasy. Miri sat between them, chewing the last corner of bread, legs crossed on the couch. She watched her mother carefully, then glanced at Hector with a look that mixed caution and dependence. She'd shifted closer to him over the last few minutes, inch by inch, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed but couldn't keep distance either. Hector took a thin, folded blanket from the cabinet and handed it to Narration. The fabric was clean, light gray, and still warm from the storage drawer. She touched it hesitantly at first, then draped it around her shoulders to steady her temperature. A shiver rolled through her body before she could hide it. "You cold?" he asked. "Just tired," she said, but the way she held the blanket tighter told the fuller truth. He moved toward the small cooking unit and switched on the low burner. A sealed container of nutrient broth sat in the cabinet, basic but mild enough for someone recovering from labor. He mixed it with a small portion of warm Orvan water, stirred it until it stopped clumping, and poured it into a metal cup. Miri sniffed the air. "What's that?" "Broth," he said. "Easy on the stomach." Narration gave a quiet, almost embarrassed thank you when he offered it. She took one sip, then another, and color returned slowly to her face. He pulled a stool closer, sitting beside the couch. Not too close, just enough that he could reach her if she needed support. A question lingered in his mind, something he hadn't asked yet, something crucial. "How long were you living down there?" he asked. Narine's fingers tightened around the cup. 3 weeks. Only 3. That meant they had been displaced far more recently than he expected. "Where were you before?" "Sector 19. Her expression shifted, part frustration, part worn-out resignation. "I cleaned transit kiosks there. Night shifts. When the contract ended, we were told to clear the unit by morning." Hector frowned. "That fast?" They said the timing wasn't their problem. Miri leaned her head against her mother's arm. "We looked for a new room all day. Everyone said no." She took a shaky breath. "One lady told Mom we bring noise. But we don't." Hector felt a pressure grow in his chest. Anger, measured and cold. He didn't let it show sharply. He kept his voice level. "You didn't deserve that." Narine's mouth tightened, as if compliments were difficult to absorb. "People look at us and see trouble. I try not to bother anyone." "You weren't bothering anyone," Hector said. "You were trying to survive." The corner of her jaw moved slightly, an involuntary reaction, something like agreement she didn't want to say out loud yet. Miri shifted again, scooting closer to Hector until her shoulder brushed his knee. He placed a hand lightly on her back. She stilled, breathing softer. Narine's gaze flicked to the gesture. She didn't speak, but the tension in her shoulders softened, as if seeing her daughter lean on him made something inside her unlock. The baby stirred, a small whimper escaping his tiny throat. Narine adjusted him carefully, letting him nurse while she pulled the blanket to shield her modesty. Hector turned his eyes away out of courtesy, but stayed close enough to support her if she needed help. "Do you have a name for him yet?" he asked quietly. Narine hesitated. "I hadn't decided. Everything happened too fast." She traced a finger across the baby's soft cheek. The newborn's skin glowed faintly under the room's white lights. Miri leaned closer, watching her brother suckle with wide, protective eyes. "We'll think of one," Hector said, not pushing. "When you're ready." Narine stared at him for a long moment, an expression that looked like gratitude, though she didn't say the word. Her breathing slowed. "You didn't have to bring us here," she said. "Most people would have handed us off to the first crew worker they saw." "I'm not most people," he replied. Her eyes dropped to the blanket. She absorbed the words without comment, but a small shift in her posture showed how they landed, quietly, deeply. Minutes passed in calm silence. Then Miri's voice cut through it, soft and trembling. "Are you going to leave us after tonight?" The question struck like a physical blow. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't manipulative. It was raw truth from a child who had never been able to rely on anyone outside her family. Hector felt the emotion immediately, sadness, sharp and grounding. He placed his hand gently on Miri's shoulder. "No," he said. "I'm staying until everything is settled." Miri swallowed hard. Her eyes turned glassy. She whispered something barely audible. "I don't want to sleep alone again." That line hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't fear of the dark. It was fear of abandonment, of another night in a cold corner with ceilings creaking and people telling them to move along. He adjusted his tone, softer. "You won't. Not tonight. Not for a while." Miri nodded and curled closer to her mother, but her small hand reached for Hector's sleeve and held on. He let her. The baby finished feeding. Narine shifted him upright, patting his back gently. Her hands shook slightly. Hector noticed. "You need a rest," he said. She hesitated. "I don't want to take your bed." "You're not taking anything." He unfolded the couch into a wider sleeping surface. "You'll use this. It's softer than it looks." Narine traced the mattress with her fingers, testing its give. "And you?" "I'll sleep near the door." She frowned lightly. "Why there?" "It gave me a line of sight to everything." There was no bravado in his voice, just practicality, protection. She relaxed a bit at the explanation. While she settled the baby into a makeshift cradle using a folded towel and the edge of the blanket, Hector dimmed the lights. Not fully, just enough to make the room calmer while leaving visibility at a safe level. He noticed Narine's breathing hitch again, a subtle tension. He moved closer. "You hurting?" he asked. She shook her head, but her body told the truth. He crouched beside her. Your abdominal muscles are seizing. It happens after delivery. Let me help. Her eyes widened a fraction. Ow! Pressure. Slow. Here. He gestured to her lower ribs. I can ease it. She hesitated, pride and instinct fighting exhaustion. Then she nodded once. He placed his hands gently on the spots that tensed the hardest, pressing with controlled, steady pressure. She inhaled sharply, then her muscles softened under his palms. Her shoulders dropped. That's better, she whispered. Miri watched from the other side of the bed, eyes heavy with sleep, but calm for the first time in hours. Hector eased back. Lie down for a while. Narration settled onto the couch, cradling the baby beside her. Miri curled up near her feet, small legs tucked under the blanket. Hector dimmed the lights further. He pulled a thin mattress from storage and placed it by the door. When he sat down, he kept an eye on the room, instinctive, protective. Miri's voice floated through the dark, barely a whisper. Are we a burden? No, Hector said immediately. Narration opened her eyes at that, watching him through the dim glow. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, then closed again. Hector adjusted the blanket over the sleeping girl and baby. His voice stayed low, certain, steady. You're not a burden. You're people who deserve better. Narration exhaled a soft, shaky breath. And for the first time since he'd met her, she let herself fully rest. Hector woke before the room brightened. The Halo's morning cycle hadn't kicked in yet, but the ventilation hum had shifted tones, slower, softer, signaling the hour before lights rose. He stayed still for a moment, listening. Narration breathed in a steady rhythm on the couch. The newborn made soft, uneven noises in his sleep. Miri lay curled near her mother's legs, one small hand still clutching a corner of Hector's sleeve where she'd reached for him sometime during the night. He felt a tight pull in his chest. Emotion, quiet, steady protectiveness. His fingers flexed slightly on the blanket he'd pulled over himself on the floor. He sat up slowly so he wouldn't wake anyone. His muscles ached from sleeping on the thin mattress, but he didn't care. The room held the calm weight of people who hadn't rested properly in weeks. He stood, rolling his shoulders once, then crossed the small room to the narrow cooking unit. He moved carefully, avoiding the metal frame of the couch. The air smelled faintly of warm fabric, broth from last night, and the clean, metallic scent of the Halo's recycled air. He switched on the burner. The click of ignition made Narration stir. Her eyes opened halfway, lashes sticking together slightly. She scanned the room in a slow, confused sweep until she saw Hector's back near the stove. Her body eased, shoulders sinking into the pillow. Is it morning? Her voice was hoarse. Almost, he said. Lights will rise in a few minutes. She blinked, adjusting her wrap and pulling the blanket up to her chest. Her movements were slow, stiff. He noticed immediately. You sore? He asked. A little. She shifted her leg and winced. Feels like I carried a generator on my back. Hector almost smiled. Normal after a delivery like yours. She looked down at the baby, brushing a stray strand of copper hair off his cheek. He made a soft sound and settled again. Miri stretched beside her mother, hair falling across her face. She looked up at Hector with sleepy eyes. You didn't leave. I said I wouldn't, he answered. Her shoulders relaxed completely, the last bit of tension dissolving. Hector set 2 slices of ration bread on the warm plate and lightly crisped them. The smell filled the room. Miri sat up fully, sniffing the air. Can I have some? You'll eat first, he said. Your mom needs time. Narration gave him a faint look of protest. I'm fine. You're not, he said simply. And that's okay. She lowered her gaze, not arguing. He placed the warm plate in front of Miri and handed her a small cup of Orvan water. She tore into the bread with small, hungry bites, crumbs collecting at her knees. Narration watched her daughter eat, the faintest smile appearing at the corner of her mouth. Hector returned to the cooking unit and prepared another portion. When he handed it to Narration, she accepted with both hands. Her fingers brushed his for a moment. Light, brief, but enough to send a flicker of awareness between them. She pulled back quickly, clearing her throat and focusing on the food. I've been meaning to ask, Hector said. Are you here legally? Registered on the Halo? Narration stiffened instantly. Why? she asked cautiously. I need to know what you're protected under. He kept his voice steady, not pushing. It affects where I can place you during the relocation period. She hesitated, the muscles in her jaw tightening. We're registered, but on the lower tiers. That's why they don't care where we end up. Hector nodded slowly. That confirmed what he'd already suspected. People on the lower tiers often got overlooked in emergency responses. They weren't technically unregistered, but they lived with the weight of being treated like it. He planned to change that, at least for them. He leaned his back against the table, arms crossed loosely. I'll transfer your temporary status to this sector today. It gives you access to medical care and food rations. Narine looked up sharply. You can do that? I can, he said. And I will. She swallowed, caught between caution and relief. Why? You don't owe us anything. He didn't look away. Doesn't matter. I'm doing it. Her breath slowed, almost trembling. She shifted the baby closer to her chest, as if grounding herself in something solid. A soft chime echoed through the unit as the halo's morning lights rose gradually, warm, white, even. It painted the room in a cleaner brightness. Miri blinked against it and rubbed her eyes. Mom, she murmured, are we staying here forever? Narine hesitated, unsure how much hope she was allowed to give. Hector answered for her, voice calm and steady. You're staying here as long as you need. And after that, we'll find something better. Narine looked at him again, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. She didn't find any. Something warm flickered in her expression, something she quickly hid behind a quiet nod. The newborn woke with a thin cry. Narine shifted him, untangling the fabric of her wrap so she could feed him. The blanket slipped off her shoulder again. Hector stepped closer, reaching out to adjust it. When his fingers brushed her skin, she inhaled softly, surprised, not uncomfortable. Her eyes lifted briefly to meet his. Thank you, she whispered. Hector stepped back to give her space. Finish eating. We'll leave in 40 minutes. Leave? Miri asked, alert again. For the clinic, he said. Your brother needs a postnatal check, and your mother needs one too. Narine tightened her hold on the baby. The clinics in this sector don't like our kind. Hector's voice lowered, firm. They'll treat you properly today. How can you be sure? Because I'll be standing right next to you. She stared at him again, long, steady, searching. The fear didn't vanish, but something else rose to the surface. Trust cautious but growing. Miri slid off the couch, wiped crumbs off her dress, and walked to Hector. She tugged lightly on his shirt. Can I stay with you the whole time? She asked. Yes, he said. You're not leaving my side. She exhaled in visible relief. Then she looked up at him with a seriousness that didn't belong on a child so young. Please don't let them take Mom away. The line landed hard. Sharp emotion punched through him, anger at whatever had made her fear that, and determination so solid it felt like stone in his chest. Hector knelt so they were eye level. No one is taking her, he said. As long as I'm here, no one touches either of you. Miri nodded and wrapped her arms around his neck in a sudden, fierce hug. He steadied her with one arm, feeling how small and fragile she was beneath her stubborn bravery. He stood again, shifting her easily on his hip for a moment before setting her down gently. He turned to Narine. After the clinic, I'll take you both to the registry office. We'll start the paperwork to move you out of the lower decks permanently. Narine froze, the words hitting her harder than he expected. You do that for us? Yes. She swallowed, eyes flicking down to the baby, then back up to him. Her voice came out quiet but steady. Then we'll follow your lead. Hector nodded once. He planned to guide her through the steps she needed to regain her independence, even if she didn't fully understand them yet. He looked at the three of them, exhausted, fragile, holding on to hope with a grip too small for the weight on their shoulders, and made a silent promise. From this morning on, they weren't doing any of it alone. The clinic on level 28 stood at the end of a bright corridor lined with white wall panels and soft blue floor markers. It looked clean, efficient, predictable, exactly the kind of place that made Narine tense the moment they approached. She shifted the baby in her arms, smoothing the blanket around him with careful fingers. Her breath came shallow, almost too controlled. Hector noticed immediately. Emotion tightened in his chest, protectiveness sharp and steady. He slowed his pace so she didn't feel rushed. "You're all right," he said quietly. "They'll treat you." She nodded once, but her jaw clenched. Miri held his hand on the opposite side, her grip small but firm. She kept glancing toward the clinic door like it might slam shut on them. Her dress, still the same worn peach fabric, hung crooked on her thin frame. Hector made a mental note to buy her clothes later. As the door slid open, warm disinfectant air drifted out. The reception counter buzzed with low chatter. A few staff members looked up, their eyes narrowed, not openly hostile, but full of the usual judgment people on the lower tiers faced. A nurse in a pale gray coat stepped forward. Her gaze moved quickly over Narine's wrapped baby, then up to Hector, landing on his inspection ID. "Are these evacuees?" she asked flatly. "Yes," Hector said. "Shift them into priority assessment. Mother and newborn." The nurse hesitated, clearly weighing her annoyance against the ID on his wrist. She opened her mouth as if about to object. Hector stepped half a pace forward. "Is there a problem?" His tone wasn't raised, but it carried weight. The nurse straightened slightly. No problem. This way." Miri squeezed his hand tighter, relief sliding onto her face for the first time since they arrived. Narine followed closely, but her shoulders trembled faintly. Stress, fear, embarrassment. She'd been dismissed from clinics before. He could feel her bracing for it again. Inside the exam room, the lights were gentle, not harsh. A padded bench lined one wall. Hector guided Miri to sit on the small stool beside it. The nurse gestured stiffly. "Place the infant here." Narine moved slowly, lowering herself onto the bench and carefully positioning the baby on the soft diagnostic pad. The blanket fell open slightly, revealing the child's pale green skin and faint shimmer around his eyelids. The nurse scanned him with a small handheld device. Her brows lifted. "Hybrid respiratory function looks stable," she said. "Good lung expansion." Narine's face softened with visible relief. She didn't say anything. She only brushed her son's cheek with the back of her hand. The nurse continued the check, more focused now. "He needs regular warm feeds every 2 hours for the next day." And the mother, her eyes flicked to Narine, then to Hector. "She's dehydrated and showing post-labor strain. She should rest for at least 48 hours. Narine opened her mouth. "We can't stay here that long. We don't even have a unit." "You have one," Hector said. She blinked. "What?" "Temporary clearance. I filed it this morning." She stared at him, disbelief plain on her face. "Why would you?" "Because you need it," he said simply. The nurse finished, then pointed to a dispenser on the wall. "She'll need electrolyte packets and nutrient bars." She paused, and a clean wrap would help support her back. Hector nodded once. "We'll get all of it." When the nurse left, closing the door behind her, the room fell quiet. Narine let out a breath she'd been holding far too long. Her hands shook as she reached for the baby. Hector stepped closer and steadied her wrist. "You did well," he said. "You're doing everything right." She swallowed, eyes shining now. Not from weakness, but from the sudden release of pressure she'd carried alone. "I'm not used to anyone saying that," she admitted softly. Miri slid off her stool and pressed against her mother's side. "He's telling the truth." Narine smoothed Miri's hair. "I know." Hector watched them for a moment, feeling something tighten in his chest again. Not discomfort, connection. A clear, grounding sense of responsibility. "You two stay here," he said. "I'll get the supplies." Narine looked unsure. "You're coming back?" "Yes," he said. "I won't leave you alone in here." She nodded, but he could see the tension behind it. He stepped toward the door, but Miri grabbed the hem of his shirt. "Wait." He crouched so their eyes met. "What's wrong?" Her lips trembled. "If you don't come back, what do we do?" Emotion hit him immediately, sharp, clean, protective. He placed his hand gently on her cheek to steady her. "I'm coming back," he said. "I don't break promises." She nodded, but didn't let go until he stood and gently placed her hand back against her side. Hector left only long enough to retrieve electrolyte packets, nutrient bars, and a soft, dark blue support wrap from the clinic's dispenser unit. When he returned, Both mother and daughter looked up at him at the same time, and something in the room eased instantly. He handed Narine the wrap. "This goes around your midsection. Helps your back." She touched the fabric, surprised at its quality. "Thank you." He helped her sit forward gently, letting her guide how close he could be without causing discomfort. His fingers brushed her bare shoulder as he adjusted the cloth. Her breath hitched slightly, not from pain, but from awareness. She kept her eyes lowered until he finished tying the last knot. When he stepped back, her posture improved immediately. "That should help when you stand," he said. She tested her breathing. "It does." Miri leaned against her mother again, watching Hector with clear trust he didn't intend to break. He turned toward the door. "We're done here. Next stop is the registry office." Narine froze. "Now, the sooner the better," he said. "You'll get access to resources and emergency credit, but I'll handle the process. You only speak when someone asks directly. I'll take care of the rest." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." Hector opened the door for them. Miri held one of his fingers as they walked out, small but determined. As they stepped into the bright corridor, the weight of the day settled differently on all three of them. Not as fear, not as uncertainty, something closer to direction. And Hector knew exactly where he planned to lead them next. They stepped out of the clinic into the brighter corridor, and the air immediately felt different. Cleaner, cooler. The noise from passing carts and light traffic hummed in a steady rhythm beneath the overhead panels. Hector adjusted his stride to match theirs, slow for Narine, careful for Miri. The newborn slept against Narine's chest inside the newly wrapped support cloth. The dark blue fabric fit snugly around her torso, holding the baby securely. Her posture had changed just slightly, more balanced, less strain across her lower back. Hector noticed it with quiet satisfaction. "You holding up?" he asked. She nodded. Better than before. Her tone carried some strength again, thin but real. He kept close without crowding her. The corridor felt busy enough that he didn't like the idea of her being jostled by the people moving around them. Miri held his hand again, her small fingers wrapped firmly around his. Her steps were short but determined. Every time someone walked too close, she shifted half a pace inward toward Hector, almost instinctively. They reached the turn leading toward the administrative wing. A security officer stood near the entrance kiosk, scanning people as they passed. As soon as he spotted Narine and the baby, his brow furrowed. "Inspection sector only," he said. "This wing isn't for lower-tier traffic. Take them back to the lifts." Miri froze. Narine tensed, her hand tightening on the baby. Hector stopped directly in front of the officer. "They're with me," he said, holding up his ID. "Temporary relocation. Emergency incident." The officer looked ready to argue, glancing from Narine to the baby and back again. "Sir, this area isn't." Hector stepped half a pace forward. "They're with me." The officer's posture stiffened at the tone. There was no aggression in Hector's voice, but the authority behind it was solid enough to shut down the conversation. The officer scanned the ID quietly, then stepped aside. "Proceed." Miri exhaled loudly, like she'd been holding her breath for minutes. Hector squeezed her hand gently. Inside the administrative wing, the air smelled faintly of ozone from the holographic walls. Thin blue screens floated across the room, displaying queue numbers. Workers moved between desks in clean uniforms. The room wasn't crowded, but the few people sitting in the waiting chairs looked up, curious, as they entered. Narine stiffened under the attention. She adjusted the baby's wrap, pulling the fabric higher over her shoulder. Hector noticed the faint tremor in her breath and stepped slightly ahead of her, blocking a clear view. The registry attendant, a woman with dark hair tied back in a low twist, glanced up from her console. Next, Hector guided them to the counter. The attendant's eyes flicked over them quickly. The baby, the girl, the exhausted mother, the human man standing close beside them. "Documentation?" she asked. Hector placed his ID on the scanner pad. "Emergency relocation. I'm filing temporary guardianship and residence authorization under section 4 to 17. The attendant raised an eyebrow. "That's usually for evacuated families during system failures." "Correct." She looked at Narine again, then at the baby. Are they living with you? Yes. Narine's breath caught. Miri looked up at him, eyes wide. The attendant tapped her console. And they agreed to this arrangement? Narine hesitated, more from surprise than doubt. Hector turned slightly toward her, giving her the space to answer herself. Her voice came out quiet but steady. Yes, we do. Miri nodded fast, almost fiercely. We stay with him. The attendant typed the response, then uploaded the forms onto the hologram between them. I need your thumbprints, she said. Narine adjusted her hold on the baby and pressed her thumb to the glowing pad. Miri copied her, standing on tiptoe to reach. The attendant turned to Hector. And yours? He pressed his thumb beside theirs. The 3 prints glowed, then merged into a single authorization symbol. 3 points around a central ring. Miri stared at it, fascinated. What does that mean? It means we're registered together now, Hector said. A slow smile formed on the girl's face. Narine's eyes softened, though a faint uncertainty lingered behind them. Is this permanent? She asked. For now. It gives you housing, food rations, medical access, and safety from relocation sweeps, Hector said. When you're ready, we'll file the permanent version. She watched his face carefully, searching for any sign that he was exaggerating or overpromising. But his tone stayed grounded and sure. And you'll help us? She asked quietly. Yes, he said, all the way through. The attendant printed a small, blue-coated plate, temporary family authorization. She slid it across the counter. You'll need this for access to the unit. Keep it visible. Miri held it like it was something fragile, almost sacred. Hector rested a hand lightly on her back, grounding her again. They left the administrative wing and walked down the quieter corridor leading to the market terrace. Narine's steps were slow, but her movements weren't shaky anymore. The wrap supported her. The registration calmed her. Hector stopped near the railing overlooking the vast violet clouds below. The morning updraft shimmered against the underside of the halo, sending warm air through the terrace. Narine closed her eyes briefly, letting the breeze wash over her face. Her copper hair lifted slightly with the airflow. Emotion rose in Hector, quiet, focused determination. Not pity, not charity, a clear sense of responsibility for the people now walking at his side. Miri tugged his sleeve. Can we get food? The real kind. What kind? Hector asked. She thought hard. The warm flatbread with the little meat bits inside. He almost smiled. Zrin-spiced meat rolls? She nodded fast. Those. Hector looked at Narine. You want some? Her lips curved in a tired, faint smile. If they're warm, they're always warm. He guided them toward the nearest stall, already planning the next steps. New clothes for Miri, a proper wrap dress for Narine, supplies for the baby, and the safest path back to the temporary unit. And further ahead, a thought he didn't voice yet. He planned to make them strong enough to stand on their own feet, even if they didn't know how to take that first step without him yet. The day was only beginning. The hard part was coming next, but they would face it together. The market terrace smelled of warm flatbread, grilled meats, and the sharp tang of citrus vapor drifting from nearby drink stalls. Morning crowds gathered under striped awnings, the air filled with quiet conversation and the hum of food warmers. Hector guided them through the flow, keeping Miri close at his side and adjusting his pace for Narine's slower steps. He bought 3 fresh Zrin-spiced meat rolls. Hot, soft bread wrapped around seasoned minced meat, the edges lightly crisped. Miri took hers with both hands, biting into it so fast she burned her tongue and yelped, then giggled through the heat. Hector wiped a dab of sauce from her cheek with his thumb, careful and steady. Narine watched the small gesture, her expression tightening with emotion she didn't try to hide. She lifted her own roll to her lips, taking a slow bite. The warmth seemed to reach her shoulders, loosening something in her posture. They found a quiet table near the terrace's edge. Hector positioned himself so he faced both them and the open walkway, a habit he never broke. As they ate, a small wind rolled upward from the gas giant below, stirring Narine's copper hair across her collarbone. The wrap dress she wore, still old, still stretched from years of work, shifted with the breeze. She tucked a strand behind her ear, but her movements were slower now, less defensive, as if she was finally letting herself breathe. "Does the baby have enough blanket?" Hector asked, nodding to the blue wrap around her torso. "He's warm," she said, brushing her palm over his tiny back. "He sleeps better when he feels weight. It reminds him he's not alone." She blinked once, realizing the words applied to more than her son. Miri finished eating and leaned her head against Hector's arm again. "Can we stay in a new place tonight, too?" "Yes," Hector said without hesitation. Narine looked at him, not questioning the decision, but absorbing the certainty in it. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to," he replied. Her cheeks warmed a shade darker. She glanced at him, then away, then back again, as if struggling with something she'd kept buried for too long. He stood from the table and held out his hand. "Let's get you new clothes before we return." Miri jumped up first, grabbing his hand. Narine hesitated, then rose slowly, her fingers brushing his palm for balance. His hand closed around hers briefly. Not a grip, just support, and heat pulsed through both their bodies at the same moment. She pulled her hand back only when she was steady again. They walked together toward a small clothing stall at the terrace's far end. Rolls of fabric hung from the ceiling. Practical outfits lined the walls. Hector stopped near a section displaying soft wrap dresses in muted colors. "You should pick something you can move in," he said. "I don't want anything expensive," she murmured. "It's not expensive," he replied. "It's needed." She touched a slate blue dress. Thin fabric, strong stitching, a long slit running up one side. She lifted it from the rack, pressed the material lightly between her fingers. "It's soft," she said. "Try it on," Hector suggested. She stepped into the fitting alcove. When she emerged, her cheeks were flushed. The dress hugged her gently, supportive around the waist, loose around the hips, opening high on one leg, but in a way that made her movements easier, not exposed. The neckline crossed over her chest in clean lines, modest but undeniably flattering. Hector looked once, slow, controlled, and then looked at her eyes instead of the shape of her body. "It fits," he said sincerely. Narine's throat tightened slightly. "You mean it looks decent?" "It looks like you," he corrected. "Strong, comfortable." Her breath caught. Miri clapped her hands. "Mom looks pretty." Narine reached for the hem of the dress, brushing it nervously. Hector stepped closer, slowly, giving her time to shift or step back if she wanted. She didn't move. "You should have clothes that let you breathe," he said, voice lower now. "Not ones that remind you of the places you were pushed into." Her eyes softened with something warm, gratitude, desire, and fear blending together. They walked back to the unit in comfortable silence, the newborn sleeping, Miri chattering about how she wanted a new blanket with shiny dots, and Narine occasionally touching her new dress as if she couldn't quite believe it belonged to her. Inside the room, Hector relocked the door and dimmed the lights. Miri crawled into the corner of the couch and wrapped herself in the gray blanket, exhaustion taking over fast. Within minutes, her breathing fell into a slow rhythm. The baby slept in the makeshift cradle, his tiny fingers curled into fists. Narine stood near the small window, looking out at the swirling violet clouds. Her new dress followed the line of her waist, the fabric catching the faint light. Hector stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth through the air. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "You keep giving us things," she said softly. "Safety, food, a home, clothes. I don't know what to give back." He turned his head toward her. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not how I was raised," she said. "We don't take without giving." Her voice trembled, not because of fear, but because honesty felt dangerous. Hector moved a little closer. "Then you can give something simple," he said. "Just let me be here. Let me help." She looked at him, eyes brighter now in the dim light. "But why us?" she whispered. "You could walk away. You could have walked away from the stairs, from the clinic, from the registry. But you didn't. Why?" Emotion hit him, slow, heavy, unfiltered. He spoke quietly. "Because the moment your daughter grabbed my sleeve, something locked into place. And I knew you shouldn't face any of this alone." Narine's breath hitched, quiet, sharp. She stepped closer without consciously choosing to. The space between them closed until their bodies almost touched. Her fingers hovered near his wrist, trembling just above his skin. He lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, and brushed a loose strand of copper hair behind her ear. She exhaled shakily at the touch, eyes fluttering half shut. Her body leaned toward his instinctively, the hem of her dress shifting around her thigh as she stepped closer. "Hector," she whispered, voice trembling with vulnerability and desire both. "If I let myself want this, I'll fall too fast." His hand slid gently along her jaw, thumb brushing her cheekbone with a steady warmth. "Then fall," he said. "I'll be right here." Her breath left her in a soft, broken sound. She stepped into him fully, her hands sliding up along his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt. He rested one hand on her lower back, fingers pressing lightly into the soft material of the new dress, guiding her gently but firmly closer. Their bodies aligned, slow, careful, certain. She leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. Her lips hovered a breath away from his. "I feel safe next to you," she whispered. "Too safe." "That's the point," he murmured. Her lips met his, slow at first, warm, searching, then deeper, more certain, fingers curling in the fabric over his chest. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her closer as her body pressed into his, soft and eager, the dress sliding against his palm. They kissed again, longer this time, until her breath trembled against his mouth. When she finally pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, her voice low. "I want you," she said, "but not rushed, not hidden, not because we're scared." He nodded, breathing steady. "Then we'll move slow. We choose the pace." She exhaled with relief, real, visible relief, and leaned into his chest. He held her gently, his hand sliding up and down the curve of her back through the soft fabric of her dress. Her body relaxed fully against his for the first time. Across the room, Miri shifted in her sleep but didn't wake. Narine looked up at him one more time, eyes heavy with affection and trust. "We sleep close tonight?" she whispered. "Yes," he said softly. "All four of us." She touched his jaw with her fingertips, tender and certain. And for the first night in far too long, she crawled into the bed not out of fear of being alone, but because she wanted to be next to him. Night settled across the temporary unit in a soft, muted glow. The halo dimmed its lights to a pale silver, enough to see shapes but gentle enough that the room felt like a safe pocket suspended far above the violet world below. Narine lay beside Hector, her head resting against his upper arm, her breath warm against his skin. For a long time she didn't move, only listened to the quiet, the newborn's soft breaths, Miri's faint rustling in the blanket pile, the distant hum of the halo's stabilizers adjusting to the late cycle winds. Hector stayed awake longer than he planned, not out of tension. He felt calmer than he had in months, but because he was aware of every detail. The weight of Narine's body leaning trustingly against him, the warmth of her thigh pressing lightly against his, the way her fingers rested on his chest, as if she needed to feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing before she allowed herself to sleep. When she shifted, he turned his head slightly. "You comfortable?" he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light. "More than I expected to be. I forgot what it felt like to sleep without being afraid." He brushed a thumb along the back of her hand, slow, grounding. "You're safe here." "And tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "And the next day?" Emotion hit him, steady, warm, certain. "As long as you stay with me, you're safe." She closed her eyes briefly, a small tremble running through her shoulders. Not fear, relief. She leaned closer, her cheek brushing his jaw. The soft contact sent heat through his chest. "I want that," she whispered. "To stay." He lifted a hand and slid his fingers through her hair, tucking a loose strand behind her ear, the same way he had earlier. The movement was slow, deliberate, intimate. "Then stay," he said. She exhaled shakily, her breath warm against his neck. She wasn't used to making choices based on desire. Survival, fear, necessity, those had ruled her life. Wanting something was new. Wanting him was terrifying in a way that felt almost hopeful. Miri stirred in her sleep, mumbling softly. Hector shifted, ready to stand if she woke, but she settled again, clutching her small blanket. The newborn gave a tiny cry, then quieted. Narration watched him react instantly to both children. Alert, careful, steady. You watch them like you already know them, she murmured. Like you've been doing this for years. I haven't, he said. But I'm learning. She touched his chest again, fingers hesitant but warm. You don't treat us like a burden. You're not. Her voice lowered. I kept expecting you to change your mind. To leave. I won't. His tone stayed grounded, not dramatic. I don't say things I don't mean. Her breath caught. She shifted closer until her body pressed fully along his side, the new dress brushing against the thin fabric of his shirt. Her leg brushed his again, closer this time, intentional, sliding slightly under the blanket. He felt the warmth of her thigh against his hip. She lifted her face, searching his eyes. If I get used to this, if I get used to you, it'll break me if you walk away. You won't break, Hector said, lifting her chin gently with his fingers. Not with me. She swallowed hard, eyes shiny in the dim light. Slowly, she placed her hand on his jaw, thumb brushing his cheekbone with soft pressure. The touch was warm, trembling slightly. He leaned in, brushing his lips against hers, slow, careful, full of warmth. She kissed him back with shy certainty, her fingers sliding into the back of his hair, pulling him closer with a quiet need she had been fighting for hours. The kiss deepened, but not rushed. Her breath trembled against his mouth, her body pressing closer until there was no space left between them. His hand settled at her hip, fingers curving around the soft fabric of her dress, guiding her gently toward him. She let him, her body relaxing into the contact. But when her breath hitched sharply, he paused. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed, voice soft. I'm not ready to go further tonight. Hector nodded, brushing his forehead against hers, calming both their breathing. We don't rush anything, he whispered. We move when you want. Her shoulders loosened instantly, relief and trust flowing through her body in a warm wave. She curled against him again, this time without hesitation. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her securely into his chest. Minutes passed with slow, steady breathing, the kind of silence that felt like belonging rather than emptiness. After a while, Narration spoke again, voice small but sure. This doesn't feel temporary anymore. It isn't, Hector said. She looked down at the sleeping baby, then at Miri, who had shifted closer to Hector's pillow without waking. Her expression softened into something hopeful, an emotion she had avoided for years. Hector, she whispered, fingers tightening on his shirt. If we stay with you, if we make a home with you, would that be all right? Emotion hit him straight in the center of his chest, warm, strong, undeniable. He kissed her forehead, slow and steady. It's what I want, he said. All of it. You, Miri, the baby, a home, a future. Her breath caught, and she pressed her face into his chest, overcome. Her hands slid up along his ribs, gripping lightly. Not out of desperation, out of connection. And if I want more than this, she whispered. More than safety, more than sharing a bed. She lifted her face to his. If I want you fully when I'm ready. He cupped her jaw gently. When you want it, it's yours. Her eyes softened, full of need, trust, and a quiet kind of love that had been waiting for a place to grow. She kissed him again, longer this time, deeper, full of the promise she wasn't ready to say aloud yet. When she finally rested her head against his chest again, her voice came out soft and certain. We're yours now. Hector held her tighter, steady, and protective. No, he murmured. We're each other's. Outside the window, the halo drifted in slow orbit, lights shifting into night cycle mode. Inside the small room, the four of them slept close, safe, warm, and together. And for the first time since Narration stepped onto Orvan Halo years ago, life opened forward instead of closing in.